Good evening, everybody. We're happy to host you to the webinar with Hanno Embregts as a part of our regular free online events with famous IT lecturers. Our IT star today is Java developer, Scrum Master and trainer at InfoSupport, who has 10 plus years of experience developing enterprise software in various fields like insurance companies, banks, hospitals, and industry at all. Today we will have 1 hour presentation, and after it Hanno will spend 15 minutes answering your questions. Feel free to use the Q&A section in the bottom of your screen where you can send your questions to our lecturer. Now I'm passing the floor to Hanno. Hanno, good evening.
So hello everyone, and welcome to this session. I hope you guys can all hear me. If you don't hear anything, please tell me in the chat so that I can do anything about it. Until now, I'm assuming that everything's all right. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session. So my name is Hanno Embregts, and I live in the Netherlands, which is a very small country, next to Belgium and Germany. And, we're quite known for making great cheese and also for baking great cookies. But that's not what you are... that's not why you joined the session, I guess. So I work in the Netherlands for this company called InfoSupport, and we do all kinds of software projects. And the one I'm doing right now is at the Dutch train company, the company that runs the trains in our country, where I participate in a large project involving all 30 or 35 Java developers, and it's great fun working for a train company because it's a very complex domain, and it's not all about finances or about financial institutions. It's all about how to get these trains running and how to make sure that they run on time. So it's a great domain to work in at the moment. Tonight I want to start a journey with you guys to build a Spring Boot application in about 40 minutes. I think it should be possible in 40 minutes. I've done it a few times before, and it should be no problem. So I hope you guys will think it's interesting. During the talk, there will be a number of voting sessions. So this will be an online voting session in which you can participate yourself, in which you can help me by defining the requirements of this application. So I hope you guys will join me and make your opinion heard about what you would like to see in this Spring Boot application. So I've told a bit about myself already. I've been a Java developer for over 10 years, and I've done all kinds of projects till now. I've also done a few projects that worked with the classic Spring framework, which is a great framework to use because it contains lots of functionality. But I always found that the custom XML configuration was a bit tedious. So in order to get everything working in a Spring environment, you needed to define all kinds of Spring beans, and they all required separate XML files. Well, in the older versions of the classic Spring framework anyway. In the newer versions, things got a bit better because you could define your bean definitions with annotations. So I like that a bit better. And when the Spring Boot framework was released, I tried to run it and do a few demo projects with it, and I liked it immediately. So I have worked with the Spring Boot project for a while now, and also with one of our customers. And they like it also because it's very quick to set up, and also quite easy to change your requirements halfway if you really want to. But we'll notice more of these requirements and how easy it is to change them in the rest of the session. So let's get on with it. I'm proposing. So about Spring Boot and why Spring Boot was actually developed in the first place. This is what the Spring website says about Spring Boot, and which is also the rationale behind starting the project anyway. So the Spring people say Spring Boot takes an opinionated view of building production-ready Spring applications, and it favors convention over configuration. So it is designed to get you up and running as quickly as possible. Well, this is quite an interesting point because the classic Spring framework, as I said a few minutes before, tends to rely heavily on all these configuration definitions, whether they are defined in XML or in Java annotations. The pro is the pro is that you can customize everything if you want, but the con is that you need to configure everything. So with Spring Boot framework, the Spring people try to apply as many default settings as they could in order to get you started very quick. Which is also the reason why I think I can build this demo application in quite a short amount of time. But we will see about that. It's a live demo, so eventually one or two things will go wrong, and I'm counting on that. So, but I'm also counting on the fact that I will be able to fix this quite quickly. So, what are the key features of Spring Boot actually? Well, what is kind of interesting that it creates standalone Spring applications, which means the default option is that the web server is embedded directly into the artifact that is produced by your project. So if you build your project with a standard Spring Boot setup, it will generate a jar file, just a jar file, and so there will be no WAR files by default. Of course, you can generate a WAR file if you want, but the idea behind Spring Boot is that by generating a jar file, which contains a web server embedded within it, you can start it up quite quickly, and you can also make sure that your deployments run quickly because you just need to copy this jar file. And you don't need any other dependencies. So in any environment that runs Java or that has Java installed, you can just start up this jar file and your application will run automatically. So you don't need some Tomcat or WebLogic or some other application server pre-installed. This jar file will just be enough for you. Well, it also uses automatic Spring configuration wherever this is possible. So it tries to reduce this amount of configuration that was done in the classic Spring framework by XML or by annotations. And it does this by assuming all kinds of defaults. Well, also a key feature is that it doesn't include any code generation and also no XML configuration, but I said the latter one already. Now the former one, this code generation thing, is quite interesting also because there were some other projects by the Spring team that featured lots of code generation, and one of these projects is the Spring Roo project, which was also in a way a successor to the classic Spring framework, or well, in general, a different approach to the classic Spring framework because this relied on generating as much code as was possible. Now with Spring Boot, a different path was chosen by trying to assume most defaults and not trying to generate the code. So actually the code that we're using in a Spring Boot project is already in the Spring Boot dependencies in the library. So you won't see it in your source code at all. It will just be used because you are using the dependencies of Spring Boot. And interestingly enough, without all these, because all these configurations are not even necessary by default, it's still possible to offer all Spring features. So you can just use all classic Spring framework features if you want, using a Spring Boot project. So this is a quite interesting feature, I think. Well, let's talk a bit about pros and cons, because every new project will ultimately have some pros and cons. So it's quite an advantage that no separate web server is needed. I told this already a few minutes ago, that you could just run the jar file on any system which has Java installed. No other web servers needed. It can also lead to a bit better debugging in IDEs, because you can just start up your jar file in a debug mode and start your debugging session right away. You know, when you have a dedicated web server running, you need to access the web server's debug port and all those things. So of course this works also, but it's a bit quicker to just debug the jar file. And I have seen in lots of occurrences that deployments can be a bit faster. You know, this percentage that I put here differs a bit from project to project, but because it's just a jar file and no WAR files needs to be uploaded to a Tomcat server, for example, the deployment will be about half as faster than when you would have just a WAR file. But you know, this number is, I just did a few runs with some projects of mine, and in one case it was 40% faster, and in the other case it was like 70%. So this is on average, you know, and I just did a few test cases. So this isn't really, I didn't test this very thoroughly, but I just did just a few guesses, in fact. But this deployment thing is really happening a bit faster than when you are deploying a WAR file to an application server. Now also, you don't need any web XML or configuration classes if you don't want to. You know, it's not really needed. Of course, you can always provide custom configuration if you think you need it or if this is a requirement. But you can also just try to use defaults and see if it works for you. In fact, what the team at Spring always says about Spring Boot is that you can be up and running with your application using just a Java file and a build script. This should be enough to get your application started. Okay, so there will also be a few cons, obviously, because Spring Boot is assuming all kinds of default settings. Custom configuration will be a bit of a puzzle. Well, I'm not saying here that it is impossible to do custom configuration. It's just that because after you've done a few Spring Boot projects, you are getting quite used to all these defaults that are assumed, and you know I'm kind of loving them, the defaults actually, because it makes my work a lot easier. So if you are doing some custom configuration, it could be a bit of a puzzle. Of course, it's still possible, but you just need to dive into it and check the Spring Boot docs to see what you should modify to be able to make it work for your use case. And I think porting your legacy Spring project would be a small disaster. So please don't try to do this because ultimately your legacy Spring project would contain lots of custom configurations which are quite difficult to port to Spring Boot. Again, I'm not saying that it is impossible to do this, but it would just be a lot of time spent on something that won't get you very much in return. You know, you won't build new functionality doing this. You will just be on a different framework. But if your legacy Spring project is working all right, I wouldn't suggest you try to port it. I think Spring Boot is best when you just set up a new project and make sure that you can get it running as quickly as possible. And of course, a drawback is that it uses Spring. So roughly half of the Java community really likes Java EE to build web applications, and the other half likes Spring. So this framework will, you know, only be interesting to the Spring half of the community. But at the end of the talk, I will tell a bit more about what you can do when you're a Java EE user, and if there are some concepts that are introduced by the Spring Boot framework that you still can use when you're a Java EE user. So I will get back to this point on the final slides. Okay, so what do you need to do if you're starting a Spring Boot project? Well, let me first go back to what I claimed earlier. So I said you could be up and running with one Java file and a build script. Well, this wasn't entirely true, because you're going to need two Java files if you really want to offer something useful. So this is an example of a controller class which controls a REST interface This is a very simple example, obviously, but this controller defines a request mapping at the root of the local server, and if you would go to this URL with your browser, this would be the response, just a fixed text from the Java controller file. And you would also need an application class with the annotation Spring Boot application, and this is the application that will be called, or the part of the code that will be run when you start up your jar file, the jar file that is generated by your build script. So this will be the only class that has a main method. And by including these two classes in your Spring Boot project, you can have your first application project up and running. Well, of course, you also need a build script to be able to assemble all the files into the jar file and to embed this web server in it. So, this is also something you will need. Most important part of this build script is that you need to apply the Gradle Spring Framework boot plugin, which will make sure that this embedding of the web server is done for you. So this is technically the least amount of code that you would need to make sure that your project is up and running. So when you have built these three files and you have put them into place, it's time to add some dependencies. And the Spring Boot project comes with a lot of convenient dependency descriptors to get you running as quickly as possible. And they all follow the same naming pattern. So I've listed a few of them here. For example, if you want to get started using JUnit, Hemcrescent, and Mockito to be able to test your code thoroughly, you can include this dependency, which downloads all these dependencies automatically. And if you're going to build a standard Spring MVC web application, you can use this one, for example. But there are lots more. I just listed a few of them that I use the most. But if you would follow this link, you could see that there are many more, like this. So this is quite a long list of all the dependencies that you can pull in directly. And these are all managed by the Spring Boot project, so there will be additional classes to help you get started. You know, it's always possible to just go to the npmrepository.com and add your own, look for your own dependency or a dependency of a different project, an alternative project, and add it to your build script, of course. But for all these technologies, Spring provides this starter dependency descriptor with some wrapper classes so that you can use it with Spring quite easily. Oh, we are going to use a few of these in our demo ultimately, but you can, for your own project, you can just choose which one you need. So that's quite handy. And also, if you're starting a project, this is also a nice tool, the Spring Initializer, which is at start.spring.io. It looks like this. And it just asks you if you want to start a Spring Boot project, what kind of build tool do you want to use? Do you want to use Java or Kotlin or Groovy? What kind of version of Spring Boot do you want to use? And you can search for your dependencies. Now, there are two ways of using this. If you know what you're going to build, you can just look for your dependencies. For example, the web dependency with Tomcat or Spring MVC. Or you can also use the full version of Spring Initializer, which just lists all the options that are available. And you can just browse through them as you go. So lots of things are supported right now. You know, just have a look at it if you're starting out, and maybe your dependency will also be here. Most of them are actually. So now the second part of this talk is mostly live coding and asking you what requirements we are going to implement using our application. But I've gone through some theoretical slides until now, and maybe there are some questions already. So I'll try to skip to the Q&A section and see if there are some questions about the theoretical ones. I'm not sure, but I'll just browse through them quickly before we are going to do the live coding. Davide Pugliese asked me, do you use IntelliJ to create the jars? Well, you can, you don't really have to. I'll be using Gradle for this demo, and if you use the Spring Boot plugin in Gradle, it will be able to create the jars for you directly. So you could also use this from a command line or from another editor. I will be using IntelliJ for the demo, but it doesn't really matter. You can also use Gradle from command line or from another IDE. And Maven is also capable of creating the jars with the Spring Boot plugin. So Radoslav Brandt, he asked, do we use jars on production with this embedded web server? Yes, we do. Well, actually, for one of the projects that I work on, this isn't running in production yet, but we are running an acceptance test server, which uses the running of this jar directly with the embedded web server. We still need to figure out if we want to run this configuration on production. So we'll do some research on that, but it doesn't really matter because you can just as easily say to Spring Boot, now generate a WAR file for production, and you can just feed this WAR file to your web server that is running on production. So it doesn't really matter, you know, Spring Boot supports it both. We're still making the decision whether we are going to run this on production. But on test servers or acceptance test servers, this is not a problem at all. So someone asked me what is pros or pros and cons. Well, it's just a short word for advantages, the pros of something. Pro and con. Advantage is pro and drawback or disadvantage is con. Okay, so Mr. Davide Pugliese also asked, where can I get a good understanding of Gradle in order to build my jar files, in case I don't want to use an IDE and I want to stick with Vim, for example, for coding? Well, I guess you could just go to the Gradle plugins website, where the Spring Boot plugin will be listed, and it will tell you which tasks are available in the Spring Boot plugin. But I can also show you later on when I'm doing the demo. So I'll leave this question open and try to show you the tasks that are added by the Spring Boot plugin to show you what is possible with them. So Gradle or Maven, says Andrei Turubchuk. I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing your name right. I'm trying to do my best here. I'll be using Gradle, but you can use both. It's no problem. Maven is also very good for building Spring Boot applications. Now, the default web server in Spring Boot, which is the next question, it's Tomcat, but you can also use a Jetty or Undertow or WebLogic if you want. The default one is Tomcat. Spring Initializer in IntelliJ, I don't think you can use it, but I'll show you when I'm doing the live coding in a few minutes, because Spring Initializer just, I don't know if I showed you this, but it just offers you a download. If you go to this, the initializer one, and you, let's see, the big button here says generate project, and this will just offer you a zip file to download, and you can extract it to your file system and open the project with IntelliJ or Eclipse or NetBeans yourself. So that's how it works. Okay. I'll answer one more question, and then I'll move on to the live coding, because I think that's the most exciting part, you know. And then when I've talked for an hour or so, I'll see which questions still remain. Let's see, which question shall we choose? What frameworks do you usually use for the interaction with the database? By Livio, Flor, and Ilya? Well, of course, it really depends on what database we're choosing. So if I would choose a relational database, I would use JPA, which is also very good to use together with Spring Data, the component of the Spring framework that interacts with a data layer. You could also choose MongoDB if you want to go object database, NoSQL. In that case, you can also use Spring Data components called Spring Data MongoDB, which couples this MongoDB operations to the Spring Data operations. So I've answered that also. I hope this will be more clear for you when we've done the live coding. So I'm suggesting let's get on with it. The live coding, I mean. So this was a slide that we were at. Well, actually, I really would like to ask you guys what we should build. So I've set up an online voting session, which is called Kahoot. I don't know if you have ever used it, but I like it. I like it a lot. So I'm starting this session, and at my screen, a URL will appear. It will be kahoot.it. So if you visit that URL and you enter this game pin 990082, you will be able to join this room, the room that I'm displaying right now, and you'll be able to vote on the questions that I'm asking you guys about what kind of application we're building, what technologies I should try to use. So if you want to make your opinion heard, please join the session and make sure that your voice is heard. Lots of people coming right now, so that's great. Keep it coming, guys. Welcome, Jack Daniels. I did this talk at a conference a few weeks ago, and there are people coming in with usernames like "We like you, Hanno," and "Yay for the Netherlands," and all those kind of things. Kind of funny. I also like this one. Okay, let me see if I can get this session started. I need to move my camera, I guess. Yeah, here we go. So every time someone joins, the timer resets, which is kind of annoying. I won't tell you guys to stop joining because that would be just a bit rude, but well, I hope it will be starting. Maybe I can start it myself. Let's see. Not sure. Yeah. Okay, so here we go, guys. Are you ready? The first question will be about the purpose of our application. So this is a question, what should be the purpose of our Spring Boot application? So are we building a craft beer catalog in which we can enter all the beers that we have tried? Are we building a simple task planner, or are we building a movie database? you guys can choose. I don't really care which one we're building. So 43 answers, and oh, it's a tie actually. I have never done this before. It was a tie between the movie database and the beer application. Okay, I'll try to keep that in mind. So what database should our Spring Boot application use? Should we use MongoDB, relational with JPA, or Couchbase? I don't really care, but maybe you guys care about this. We're doing relational with JPA. Okay, that's great. Thanks a lot for joining, guys. So, we're not doing a new game, I guess. So let's close this one up. Okay, so, well, actually, it was a tie between a movie database and a beer application. Well, I've done a lot of beer applications in the past. On every conference, everyone wants to see a beer application. I'm not really sure why. So let's build a movie database because I haven't done that in a while and I just like it. Okay, when we are starting a Spring Boot project, we go to the Spring Initializer application. I'm going to choose a Gradle project with Java and the latest stable version of Spring Boot, which is 1.5.8. So let's give this guy a group ID. So let's call it Luxoft. And let me switch to the simple version. So the artifact will be called, I guess, a movie database. And I guess you guys chose a relational JPA approach. So let's add the JPA dependency. Also, I'm going to add the H2 dependency. This is an in-memory database, which is great for testing purposes and also for demos like this, so that I don't have to install a very bloated Oracle application on my laptop. And let's also include the dev tools of Spring Boot, development tools, which are just a bunch of very handy tools to, for example, make sure that my changes will be hot deployed onto the embedded application server. So I don't need to stop and restart the server each time. Now I'm going to click on Generate Project, and I get a zip file, which I'm going to show in the Downloads folder. This is the zip file, and I'm going to extract this to a location that is right for me. Or I can also do it like this, and I'll paste it somewhere so that I can go to this location with the IntelliJ. So I'll fire up my IntelliJ right now, and I'll import a new project. And yeah, these are all the beer applications I built in the past. And right now, let's refresh this. I'm going to use the movie database. So this is the contents of the zip file that I downloaded, and I'm going to import this Gradle project. I'm using auto import, and I'll make sure that IntelliJ starts the build process. Now, while it is building this, let's see what build script was generated. So this is the build script that was generated by Spring Boot by Spring Initializer, sorry. And these are the plugins that are applied by default. I'm not sure why Eclipse is default because I'm not using Eclipse, so let's change that. This is of course the group ID that I entered, and still uses Java 8 for I'm noticing. And these are the dependencies that I chose. So I chose the data JPA dependency and also the dev tools for the hot deploy functionality, and the H2 database to have an embedded in-memory database while we are testing our application. Okay, while I was explaining this, all dependencies have been downloaded, and everything that we needed for application is now available. So we can get started. So because we are making a movie database application, let's make a movie class, because ultimately we want to store the movies and tell everyone which one we watched and all those kind of things. So let's try to start by defining an ID, because this will be used to identify a movie in the database. we are also going to need the name of the movie. And what can we store also? A year, for example. I'm saving the year as string. This is, maybe you guys think it should be an int or something, but a string will be much easier when I'm displaying this in the user interface. For now, if this was an actual application and if we had days to prepare it, I would probably choose a different data type. But for now, I'm going to do a string, and let's also store the lead actor of the movie and also the supporting actor. Of course, each movie has more actors, but we can just store 2 of them. Now, we're also going to need some getters and setters, and I'm just generating them. You can also use a project like Project Lombok or something, so you don't have to type them by hand. I'm just generating them right now. And because we are using JPA, we need to annotate this class with the entity annotation. And it's already on our class path, so that's quite handy. Also, this is an ID, so we need to annotate this with the ID annotation, and also we want to really, what's this? Let's see if I have the right ID one. I guess this is the right one. And we also want this one to be generated. So let's add a generated value annotation to it. I guess this will be enough for our entity class. So let's now create a repository class that will be able to do some interaction with the database. So let's call it movie repository. Well, actually, this shouldn't be a class because Spring Data can just provide a runtime implementation of an interface during runtime if you extend, for example, the JPA repository interface. This is something that I really like about Spring Data. You can just define an interface, and Spring Data will just provide runtime implementations of all kinds of frequently used database operations like a find all or a delete by ID or all those things. If you would see the source code, the source code of the JPA repository interface, well, actually, you would need a concrete class of them like this, while the interface will actually be enough just for the methods, I guess. You can see what methods are available by default, so like find all and delete and get one, and all those methods will be available to you, and you don't need to provide any implementation. It is important that you define in the generic type arguments what type of entity you are using. In this case, it will be movie, and also what data type your ID column is. And because this is JPA, I'm using a long. For example, if you're using MongoDB, you would need an object ID or a string at this point. Okay, now we have a movie repository interface that will be assisted by a runtime implementation that is generated by Spring Boot. So I guess we can add a test class to see if this database, the database communication is doing what I expect it to be doing. So I have prepared a test class before because it will be far too much work to do this during the half hour of live coding. So let's copy the movie test class and place it into the test folder. This is a default test class that we're not needing, so I'm going to delete it. Now here's the movie test class, and let's see if this already compiles. I guess I need a long right here, so let's just add a random long. Well, it's not really a random right, but it's just a value of 1. So in this test class, I'm just defining a movie and saving it to the repository, and then I'm testing on the find all whether this find all really returns one result. And after this assertion has been done in the teardown, we can just delete everything from the repository again. This shouldn't be a collection, I guess. It can be a list. like that. Now I'm going to run this test and see if it succeeds. And while we are doing that, I'm going to start another voting session because I also want to know what kind of application we're building. So are we building a classic web application, or are we doing an Angular front end with some REST calls to the back end? So this is also a question that I want to ask you guys. So I'll run the test, and while it's running, I'll start up the next voting session, which will be the last one, the second one. So if you guys can be ready again to join the session, I'll try to start it quickly, like this. There we are. It will be a different game pin, by the way, so don't be confused by that. While we're waiting for players to join, I can just have a quick look at the tests. And it seems like all tests have passed, which is great news, of course. So it has compiled all my classes, and because of this H2 database in memory, the movie that I added was saved and retrieved also. And of course, after this process is killed, the H2 database will be down also. So after each reboot of the embedded server, I need to add more movies, but it emulates the behavior that I would want to receive at the end. Oh, I see the quiz has already started. Sorry about my blabbering. So the first question is, what architecture should our Spring Boot app implement? Well, I told you about this already. Are we building a single page application with some REST controllers and AngularJS frontend, or do you really want to see how to build a classic Spring Web application with Spring Boot using web controllers and a templating engine? It's up to you, because Spring Boot doesn't really care. Well, it's a close call, but the single page application has won this voting round. Well, that means that this question is not really necessary anymore, because templating frameworks only apply with classic web applications. So it's great that you guys are answering this. I would do the same, I guess, if I'm honest, but we won't do anything with the results because it's a single page application for us. So it means we are using this Angular frontend. The last question is still relevant. What web server should our application use? Well, I've put two options here, Jetty or Tomcat. You just choose, and these pictures, I don't want to influence the voting process at all. I just looked a few pictures up that are remotely similar to the options that are here. So don't let that influence your voting. And the answer is Tomcat. Thanks for voting, everyone. Thanks for participating in the definition of our requirements. I'll close up this code and continue on with live coding because we have something to build. We are doing some AngularJS views and also a REST application. So let's get started with that. First thing we need to do is add the Spring Data REST dependency because I don't have it yet, and we are going to need it. So let's copy this one and tell Spring to get this dependency right here. Thank you. I'm saving it right now, and I'm hoping that it will get up my dependencies. We can get started with a REST controller, I guess, because this is what we need, a class that exposes these REST operations to the front end. So let's create a class called movie controller and annotate it with the REST controller annotation, which is quite great. This was already pulled in from the dependency that I just added, so this is quite fast. Well, in IntelliJ, I didn't use it with Eclipse, so I'm not really sure. Maybe you guys can can try it out for me. Also, we need to define a request mapping because this REST part of our application needs to be reached at a certain request URL. And I like to use a REST prefix for everything that I'm doing with REST applications. So when you go to localhost, without any additional request URL, we will just see the view. And if you do localhost/REST, in this case movie, you will be able to access the REST operations that we are exposing to the outside. Now we will need a repository class to be able to interact with the database. If you're building a large application, you would typically also introduce a service layer. So the controller will access the service layer and the service layer will access the repository layer. But because this is just such a small application, I'm skipping the service layer part. But for your fully fledged application, you should really introduce the service layer. Okay, so we are going to need a movie repository like this. And if you have worked with Spring before, you know that the injection mechanism works with the auto-wired annotation. So in this case, I can inject my movie repository and don't need to create a new one. And let's try to start by getting a list of all the movies that are available to us right now. So let's call this list movies. And we can simply return the find all operation of that movie repository. This will be enough, and let's map this, or let's bind this to the get method. So if we are doing a get request on this URL, this method will be called, and a list of movies will be returned. Okay, now let's copy some views. I have prepared the views before because it will be, well, this is not a session about how to define AngularJS views or any other views for that matter, so I've prepared them in my own time. So let's just copy them. Maybe this is an idea for another good session, but in this session I really want to focus on defining the wiring between user interface and database, because this is what Spring Boot is very good at. So for an AngularJS view to work, we are going to need a static folder in source main resources. And in this static folder, I'm pasting the views right now. Well, the static folder is just the default place for any application server to serve HTML, JS, CSS files. So it's just a standard place. And also I need to, I'm going to need the AngularJS files. So I'm going to start a bash process and make sure that I'm going to pull in the AngularJS file. Let's see where we are. Java workspace. So I was at movie database, source, main, resources, static. So I'll install Angular. I'm still using the old version, by the way. I've created these view templates when the version 2 wasn't released yet. Maybe I'll update them in the coming months, but for this example, it doesn't really matter. So I have pulled in some modules, and the AngularJS file is present, so that's important for our view to work. This is the movie database that we're using. Oh, I guess I call it info support movie database, which is no copyright infringement whatsoever. Still the same abbreviation though. That's not really a problem. I guess this should work, I guess. So, well, this view is not really important, but I've just defined a standard table in which all the movies that are present in the database right now will be displayed. So let's try to run our application, because this will be the first time to run it. So we need to add a run configuration, which will be a Gradle configuration. And the Gradle task that is exposed by the Spring Boot plugin is called boot run, which first creates a jar file and then runs this jar file directly. So this will be the fastest way to get up and running. This is the project folder that we are going to use. So let's apply this and run the boot run. Task. There we go. Looks okay. And Tomcat has been started on port 8080. So let's see if, let's see if this already will give us some response. Well, there it is. Looks like everything's working right now. No errors. But because we are in a in-memory database, we need to be able to add some movies before we can view them actually. And we haven't built any add functionality yet. So let's try to build that fairly quickly so that we can see if the list functionality is working for us. So let's return to our controller and make sure that we can also add a movie. Now this add operation, I'm going to bind to the the post request. So let's define a post mapping and make a public void add movie. And actually, when I edit a movie, I just want to receive this as a parameter. And in a post request, I can send the movie fields in the body. So let's add a request body notations. So this will tell Spring that the body of the post request will contain the movie in a JSON format, and it can be parsed to a movie object. But this will happen automatically in Spring Boot, no problem. Well, I have to set. No, I don't have to set an IDE, but because the IDE is auto-generated, so the only thing that I need to do is call the movie repository.save methods and add the movie entity. And I guess this will be enough to add the movie. So let's try it out. I'm going to rebuild my project, and after this has been compiled, it will be hot deployed. The first time this takes a little while, but it will be quicker if you do it more often. And the reload has happened in 2 seconds. So let's reload it and try to enter a movie. Now this functionality is called watch a movie actually. So let's enter some movie information. Who likes a good movie? I really liked the movie Goodfellas. I don't know if you guys have watched it, but I liked it. I guess it was released in the early 90s. Now the lead actor was, of course, the amazing Robert De Niro, and the supporting actor was Ray Liotta. Let's see what happens if we send this. Well, there you have it. This movie was added to our database, and it is now shown in our list. And if you don't believe me, we can just watch the network traffic and see what happens. So let's watch another movie. Besides these crime movies, I also like musical movies very much. So there was a few years ago a movie called Walk the Line. This was about the life of Johnny Cash, and I also liked this one very much. The lead actor was Joaquin Phoenix, and the supporting actor, well, actually actress, was Reese Witherspoon. So let's watch the network traffic for a while, see what happens if I send it. So the request is already gone, but you can also see the result of this request when I'm loading the home screen. This is what happens. This request is fired, and this is a GET request on this URL. And this is the response from the application. So I'm really actually sending some requests to my REST application, and because I have added 2 movies right now, I get these 2 movies as a response. Now we are able to list movies, and we are also able to add them, but of course we want to be able to edit them also, and I haven't built that, so let's add some editing functionality. This one I'm going to map to the boot mapping. I'll say I call it update movie. And actually it's a bit like the add movie one, because I also need the request body here, because any field of this movie can be, in theory, can be changed, so I need to override every field. And I can just tell the movie repository again to save this one. Like this. And while we are at it, let's also create the delete method. So let's connect this to the delete mapping. This can also be a void. Delete movie. And in order to delete a movie, actually the only thing I'm going to need is the ID of the movie. So let's have a long movie ID in here. There it is, and we just can tell the movie repository to delete the item with movie ID. You know, these implementations are not really complex, right? They're just one-liners. So that's quite handy because we didn't have very much time to build this application. I am going to rebuild my project and see if every functionality is functioning according to spec. I really hope so. Let's find out. Yes, so I have refreshed my application, and of course, being an in-memory database, all the movies have disappeared again, so I need to add a few more, which is not really a problem actually. So let's go on to some more of my favorites. I like The Shawshank Redemption. I hope more of you liked this one because it's a great film with the lead actor Morgan Freeman, and not sure what the other one is called. You know, we should find out because we should also use very realistic test data, you know. Tim Robbins. Actually, Tim Robbins is the lead actor. Whoops, sorry. But that's a problem because I can now first enter him as supporting actor, and then afterwards I can test the edit functionality by swapping them. So I have added this. Now let's try to edit it because Tim Robbins happens to be lead actor and not the supporting one. So let's switch them. And there we go. Lead actor has become Tim Robbins and also Morgan Freeman. Now the only thing I haven't demonstrated is the delete functionality. So let's watch a really crappy movie and make sure that it never appears. Yeah, that it never appears again. So I'm really sorry for this one because it was very bad, in my opinion. So I will make sure that it gets deleted as soon as possible. Lead actor Qui-Gon Jinn, what's his name? Liam Neeson, of course. Liam Neeson. I'm really used to, you know, when I'm doing these demos, that people from the room are shouting, Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor, you know. But it's a bit different with webinars. Ewan McGregor. Maybe I should check the chat more often. Maybe you guys are already shouting all kinds of suggestions. Sorry about that. Well, there you have it, the worst movie of all time, and I really didn't like it, so let's just delete it right away, and well, this seems to be working. So there you have it. We have built a fairly basic, but still we have built a full web application in like 30-35 minutes. And it is possible because of Spring Boot, because you can be up and running very quickly. This is a great little application, guys. I really like it. So what I really want to do is wrap the talk a bit up, do some summaries, and then I would like to go over a few of your questions, if you don't mind. So let's return to the slide deck. It's right here. Wrap up in questions. So in summary, Spring Boot gets you up and running fairly quickly because, you know, we just downloaded this project setup and we're running 5 minutes later, we were running our first application with Spring Boot, so that's quite quickly. And well, I have already told you, this Spring Boot assumes all kinds of standard configurations for rapid development. For example, for those of you that have worked with the Classic Spring Framework, if you're defining your Spring Beans for your auto-wiring, you always had to configure what packages to scan for components. So there was like a component scan annotation or something. This is one of those defaults that were just assumed by default, and because I used the same package for each file in this demo, all files were automatically scanned for component annotations. So this is one of those examples that these default configuration settings were very handy, because it saved me lots of time in this demo. You have seen in this dependency list that it plays nice with a wide range of frameworks. You know, I haven't actually come across a framework that doesn't work with Spring Boot, so in that case it's a very good project, good framework that can be integrated with lots of other stuff. And I hope that I was able to show you that Spring Boot is up to the task no matter what choices you make. You know, there were all kinds of other options in the Kahoot questions that you could also have chosen, and at the end we would still have a working demo application. So in fact, when I did a project for a customer of mine, we started out with a JPA-based database, and we switched like 2 months into the project to a MongoDB database, because this customer wanted to have full text search capabilities, which is much better supported by NoSQL databases. And it really wasn't any problem. You know, I was really scared that we had a lot of work porting everything to MongoDB, but well, of course the queries were different and the test data was different, but we really switched over from JPA repositories to Mongo repositories, and Spring Boot didn't care, you know, it just worked fairly quickly, and I was really surprised by that. So even if you are changing your requirements halfway, it's still be able to, Spring Boot will still be able to make it work. So that's what I like about it. Now, what if you prefer Java EE? I have promised you to return to this point at the end, so right now it's a good time as any. At least you can use embedded servers with Java EE. Both Tommy Embedded and Wildfly Swarm offer these capabilities of building a jar file with an embedded web server in it. So follow these links if you want to know more. Of course, all the other stuff like automatic component scan, offering dependency descriptors won't be available, because that's just a Spring functionality. But trying to get up and running with just 50 or 60 lines of code is something that has been done using JBoss shrink wrap. So if you want to know more about that, read this blog post. It's quite interesting. Only thing that I don't really like about it is that nothing has been done on it since this blog post. So this was just someone who tried to get a web application up and running in very few lines of code. And I guess he managed to do it, but this project has never been continued. So I tried to keep searching on these Java EE alternatives, you know, to be able to assess whether this Spring Boot approach will be also applicable for Java EE users. Well, you won't be able to get to all the capabilities that Spring Boot has to offer right now, but embedded servers will be possible, and quick assembly with just 50 lines of code is also possible. So if you're a Java EE user, or if you're using Java EE right now in your project, you should really check out these links. Okay, so I guess I have finished everything I wanted to tell you, and it's time to go over to the questions. And also some chat messages, I guess. Let's see. So there are both questions in the chat box and also in the Q&A box. I'll try to focus on the Q&A box for now. So if your question isn't already in the Q&A box, please try to edit right now so that I can see it. I'll start at the bottom this time. So the first question I see is, does Spring Boot support Java 1.9 or Java 9? Well, yes, it does. In this example, I use 1.8, but Java 9 will be, it's supported already, so there's no problem. Can you put the sources somewhere? Yeah, I will put the sources at GitHub after this talk. Yeah, promise. Pinky promise. So check out my Twitter handle if you want to see the link to the GitHub project. I'll write it down for now, so that I won't forget. So check my Twitter profile for the link to the code example. So Andre Nakin asked me, what if I need a console app with dependency injection, aspect-oriented programming, etc. functionality. A console app, that's an interesting question. I've never built a console app with Spring Boot before. It was always a REST application or a web application or something like that. I would have to dive a bit deeper into this. If you would like to repeat your question at my Twitter profile, I'll look into it for you in the next days, if that's okay. How did you manage to connect to the H2 database? Well, this is actually one of these default settings that just works. So if you're using a JPA repository, and so I'll try to show you. If you're using a JPA repository, which is this one, by using the Spring Starter data JPA dependency, it will, when it's running, it will automatically try to find an implementation of these classes. And because I have put, well, actually Spring Initializer, I've put H2 database in the runtime dependencies. The H2 dependency is the only library that offers an implementation at runtime. So it kind of works the same with the same construct as auto-wiring dependency injection. So for this JPA interface, there needs to be an implementation, and at runtime, the only one that it can find is the H2 database. And in that way, it's working without any configuration. So that's quite handy. I really like it. A lot of interest. Web app built fast and good. Well, thank you, Volodymyr. It's always great to have some positive feedback. So Yaroslav asked me how far away such kind of demos are from real-world apps. Well, of course, this is a very, very small application, but I'm doing quite a big project at a customer of mine that is about scanning physical documents and putting them into a cloud storage and annotating them with all kinds of data. And that project actually started out as a small demo, just like this one. With just one front page or 2 pages, and I showed some proof of concept about uploading high quality scans and trying to do optical character recognition on it. And this was all Spring Boot based, and he was really impressed with the speed that I had managed to get something working in the first place. So this project is now running for, I guess, over a year or something, and it has grown a lot bigger. But after the first sprint that we did, the finished product kind of looked like what we have built here this evening. So, if you're building a real-world app with Spring Boot, it is possible, because I'm doing it right now, and I've done it a few times. And after the first sprint, it really looks a bit like this demo application, which is, in my opinion, no problem at all, because it's just the minimum viable product after the first sprint. So Andre is asking me, please show the complete build Gradle and whether target compatibility 1.8 is necessary. That's a good question, because I've never tried to remove it, but I can try to show you. So I can remove it and see what happens. But I guess it will just assume that Java 8 is being used. I guess I can see this in the module settings. Like this. Why it still says 1.8, I'm not sure if this is because of the Gradle file or just because IntelliJ has assumed that I'm using 1.8. But I guess I can bump it to 9 if I want. It's not really necessary to have it in there. Also, by default, the Eclipse plugin is activated, so I'm not really sure how up to date this template file is. But you can, of course, customize it any way you want. So, yeah. So Jevko asked me, how easy is it to have different configurations, for example, of the database for test and production? Well, it's fairly easy, because there is an application properties file. This one is empty right now, but you can define multiple ones for different environments. I've done this in this in this bigger web application that I've talked about a few times. I've done this, and it's quite easy because you can define multiple copies of this one, the application properties one, for dev and test and production. And in your Grader file, you can refer to them and do some stuff with them if you would want to. So this is quite easy. Of course, you want to have a link or something. Feel free to ask it on my Twitter profile again for some more extensive question answering. That's no problem. But you should be able to find something if you Google for this, different configs, Spring Boot, database URLs, for example. That shouldn't be any problem. So Andre Nijkin also asked me, does Spring Boot contain Tomcat server inside? Well, yeah, in fact it does. Actually, it comes with the data starter REST dependency. This has Tomcat by default, but if I would really decide that I hate Tomcat and want to exclude it, that's no problem at all. I can just exclude the module with the Gradle like this, Spring Boot starter Tomcat, and instead of that I can add a compile dependency to, let's just copy it because it will be much faster. I can define a compile dependency to Spring Boot starter Jetty if I would want. Something has gone wrong. What is it? Oh, I need to use a single quote here, like this. So it will resolve some dependencies right now. And in this case, we really need to stop our server because it won't reload magically. We need to stop Tomcat 1 and do a new boot run, and then it will start up the Jetty server. Oh, I see I've made a typo here. I don't think this will work. So let's do it again. Is this one still running? No, this one has stopped, so that's okay. Let's give this more time and I can do a few more questions, I guess. I've lost my question screen. Where's my question screen? Ah, here it is. So in fact, I'm answering this one right now. Does it contain Tomcat server? Well, so like I said, the data REST dependency contains a Tomcat server by default. And if you were to exclude Tomcat and include Jetty, you could see that Jetty has been started right now on port 8080. And you can just swap it if you want. Or under Tau or WebLogic, just whatever you want. How did you manage to create a GUI which changes unavailable methods? In few first minutes, update and delete method was not available. Is it Angular option? Yeah, I haven't shown you the Angular view that much, but it's right here. You can also see it when I upload it to GitHub. There was a movie list part which I viewed in the beginning with the table of movies, and when you clicked on, for example, delete, it would call the delete function in the JS file, but I haven't simply used the delete function until it was available. I could have done it, but then I guess it would have been a JavaScript error or something. Well, actually, no, these JavaScript functions I have prepared before, so these were already available, but I added these REST endpoints. So the delete, for example, a delete call on the REST movie or a get call on REST. Well, the get one was actually there from the beginning, but the delete one I added later. So it could have worked until this point where I would get a 404, I guess, because, 405, because this method was not really supported on this URL. So I could have tried it, but it wouldn't have worked anyway. Like that. So what is the best way to redirect to index.html when we use virtual routing in Angular? By default, web server will look for HTML files in static folder when we put root name and URL. I guess, well, I've built a few Angular apps. I always use a routing provider in Angular, just in a separate JS file that checks the URL and redirects to index HTML if you want it. But this is not really Spring Boot related, so I would love to help you out on this one. But maybe you should also ask it on my Twitter profile. I'll have a bit more time later on in the week to talk about Angular. That's not really a problem. But it's not really like not really Spring Boot related. So yes, this is a question I have answered already. Save the demo project somewhere to access later in GitHub. I will do that. Check my Twitter page. Yes, I will upload the code somewhere. This is an interesting question. It is by Vitali, and he asked me, where should we put custom Hibernate calls like HQL criteria? This is the last question I would like to go over. Also because we're running out of time, but I think it's a very interesting one, and it's a very good question because, as you guys all may know, I have just supported a few very basic database operation, but in a fully fledged application, you're going to be needing lots more of complicated queries. So what will you do with that one? And it's a very good question, so I would like to spend some time on it. Just a few minutes, and then we'll wrap it all up. Well, you don't really want to, but you can't really extend this interface, because it's very handy that Spring Boot provides you with a runtime implementation. What you can do, I don't know if you guys have used Spring Data before, but Spring Data offers all kinds of runtime on-the-fly implementations of all kinds of common find queries. So, for example, you could say, I'm defining an interface method called find by lead actor, for example. And you could just supply string lead actor. And the Spring Data project will just assume that every method that's called find by will lead to the same query. So when it encounters find by, it will take the rest of the method name, in this case lead actor, and look in the entity object if there's a field named lead actor. In this case there is. And just plug in the value of lead actor that you're giving you right here, and it will just then generate the query for you. So this is one part of the answer. You can also do things like containing, which will generate a like query. So you can just provide part of the lead actor name, and you can also do something like containing ignore case, which will also ignore any case differences. You should look into this on the Spring Data project website. It's great stuff. Now, the second part of the answer is, what if I would want to define my own custom query? This will be a bit different. Obviously, you can't use a runtime implementation because you want to define it yourself. So I've done this a few times, and what I tend to do, and this is also encouraged on the Spring Boot website, is create my custom interface, which I can do right now. So I would create an interface that's called movie repository custom, for example. And I can define the method here that I want to customize. For example, a list movie find by decade or something. This is a very custom query, find by decades and an int decade or something. I'm not going to do the implementation here because it will be too long, but you guys can see, I guess, that this is a very custom query. If you are doing 90s, you need to return every movie that has been published between 1990 and 2000, so it's quite custom. Then you can create an implementation of this one. So you will say movie repository custom implementation or something, or think of a better name than this one, because this one is not really a good one. implements repository custom. Now, of course, we need to implement this method that we defined. Now, this will be the place where you can place your HQL or criteria API or whatever you want. You guys will know by yourself how to do this. And in order to still be using this interface that we have defined here and the on-the-fly runtime implementation, you can just make this one extend your custom interface also, like this. And well, that's really all. This is also, it works a bit like the component scanning, you know, so the methods from JPA repository will be implemented by the runtime configuration of this one, and for the methods on this one, it will just search for an implementation class, which will, in this case, will be this one. If you're interested, I can post a link to the Spring Boot docs that explain this a bit further, but I've used this a few times and it works really great. So in this way, you can augment the standard runtime implementation with your own custom operations. Yeah. I really like this question, by the way, Vitaly, so thanks very much for that. It was a great question. Well, with the answering of that question, I would like to thank you all for listening to this webinar, and I hope you guys had a great time. I always have a great time when I'm live coding a cool Java application, so I would like to thank you very much for participating, and hope to see you another time. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great night.